Hi, my name's Tim, and I want to talk to you about why enterprise businesses want MCP. So the business will always push for increased profits. And they do that by pushing on the operations side, saying you need to drive reduced costs through speed and efficiencies. And then on the IT side, they still need to maintain security and reduce their administrative costs. So on the operations side, they're asking for, I need that information faster and easier. And on the technology side, they're saying, well, we must stay secure and organized. That causes a tension between them that we'll see through history. So way back when, we had business users needed to have access to the data. And to do that, they would go through human IT operators. And the human IT operators would access those back-end systems and data. And they managed the solution plan, which was, hey, in order to get this result for the business user, I need to implement a plan of pulling data from different systems and calling to make changes in others. And then I need to figure out, how do I do that? What's the protocol for connecting to that system and accessing it? Which they were the security implementation. They were the ones that decided, is this person asking for this actually authorized to get it? And then the data transformation was that they needed to make sure that that data coming out of the database, they needed to know the schema, they needed to know the language, and they needed to make sure that either the data coming out was then translated for the users, or the users' inputs was translated in the proper procedure calls to the backend systems. Now, this all put the accountability on that individual administrator. And so I call it the admin era. Now, the operations was saying, we need to make it faster and easier. Remember, they've got that push from the business. So what happened is we came up with, well, let's put an application instead of that human IT operator. And let's have it connect to the backend system. And let's have it manage everything that human operator was doing. It has to build the solution plan, the task workflow, the security implementation, and the data transformation. Now, it was programmed to do this. So it really was the developers and the product analysts and all the different folks in the IT teams developing these applications so that they knew how to access those individual systems, what the schemas of the data was, and how to implement the plan, what was the user experience, the user interface to implement the solution plan and the task workflow to get the job done. Operations loved it, right? We have direct access. But the technology folks noticed something. We've got some security issues. We noticed that the application had to have, in order to connect in, had to have much more access than we wanted to expose. So we need a better way to standardize. And that's where we came up with APIs. So the APIs knew the individual systems they were talking to. They knew the data schemas, and they could do the data transformations into a standard like REST and with JSON. And they would implement the security each individually. That's a problem. It's a nightmare. So that's where we said, okay, let's put in an API gateway to handle the security implementation and have the data transformation and the knowledge of the backend system in the individual API. Great. In addition, at this point, we now pass through the user credentials. So the application asks you to log in. That login could be managed because it's all in one place. It could be managed through the API to do identity and access management. So we're secure. Well, that's great, but the operation is going to get pushed forward even more. So they are saying, well, we need apps for each team because having this one big app or a few apps is just too much to train everybody on. We want it to be more specific. That solution plan needs to be more controlled by the individual domain that business user is working with it. So the technology team say, okay, we've got curation issues. So let's take a step back here and talk about what I mean by curation. Curation is just an alignment to the roles, tasks, and goals of the individual business user or that business team. So now we're going to basically, for each team, we're going to have applications, like for sales, a CRM. And for support, we're going to have a support tool. And for finance, we're going to have their finance billing tools and so forth. And each of those needs to make sure that it might have its own API gateway so that it's curated to control the security for that behind, and as that gateway then accesses the APIs. This is API accountability. We basically put all the responsibility mostly into the API for that security and reliability and traceability and so forth. And I call this the API era. So along comes AI. And operations like, AI is great. It works so fast. Let's get it into the business. And then we quickly see if we want to connect it into our systems, it's going to need access to our data and our systems so that it can give the right kind of context for the operations to use it effectively. Here we go again. So we replace the applications with AI agents. And now the AI agents are going to talk to the API infrastructure. But see, large language models, LLMs, within the agents don't do that so well. Well, one of the things is, if you think about it, they don't have the context that the developer did when they built that application. Yes, there might be an open API spec, Swagger document that for the API, but that was meant for a human to read. So it's not, even though the LLM could read it, it's not formatted the best way. And then on top of that, the developer had way more information than that. They had product documentation. They had product owners helping them to detail information during the Scrum sprints. They had feedback and user groups and user testing. And along the way, they probably did several versions of that application as they rolled it out from an MVP until something that actually was usable for the most part by the business users. They got a lot of feedback to change things, to fix the solution plan, to fix the task workflow. And so now we're asking these agents to do the same thing without all that information. And we're asking them to build that solution plan, build that task workflow. And then we're hoping that the same security implementation is going to work. And it doesn't. And part of the reason is because agents have their own autonomy. So they need their own identity. And so when we think about the business user calling the agent, now they've got a delegation going on, a delegation of authority. So the business user has their authority and the individual agent has its authority. And API wasn't set up for that. So we need a protocol that works with the AI model's context. Hence the Model Context Protocol, MCP. And I'm not going to go into the details greatly here because there's a lot of videos on this and there's a lot of information, and I might make one myself. But what I want to point out here is that we've got an MCP server that includes the tools, resources, and prompts to access those backend systems and data and resources. And then you've got the agent is that MCP host and client that is on that front end. Okay? So we put in the MCP servers. They could be new MCP servers connecting in and running calls against the backend systems, or they could be just wrappers around the APIs we've had as legacy. But we've got MCP servers. Wait, we've seen this movie before. There's a problem. We're missing, not necessarily missing, but we can implement some security in the MCP server, but now we've got to handle that individually. When before we had, with the APIs, we had that gateway that was unifying that consistent control plane across the APIs. So obviously we need an AI gateway, right? We need to proxy those MCP servers. All right, we're secure. Oh, but we've got a curation issue again. We know this movie. So now we've got individual agents that have roles and goals, and we're piping them all through just an open catalog of all of our MCP servers, right? Well, we don't have to. That's where a composite MCP server comes in. So our AI agent wants to call and do a specific role. So let's pull some support tools, such as a support lookup. Let's give it resources like customer knowledge. And then let's give it some prompts to help it with like ticket structure. And then let's give it access to other agent tools and other agents that are AI for a support role that are not directly related to support themselves. Let's give it some access to those. And this composite MCP server, we'll call it customer support, right? And now we've got curation, we're governed, and we've got it role focused for customer success or customer support, and it's going through the security of that gateway, that AI gateway. So once we have a composite MCP servers, then we can make different ones for that the same way as we did with the applications. So it's the same pattern here. We just changed the user. So instead of an application that was used by a human and it was built for the UI and the UX of a human, we've now built essentially kind of a virtual application in a composite MCP server in the language and user experience that AI LLMs expect to see. So now we've implemented we need to implement our MCP gateway across these composite servers. And now we've got our curation. So now this enters agent accountability. And through the MCP gateways, we can implement observability, traceability, lineage, so forth, so that we can track what happened, when it happened, the same way as we did with APIs when we logged those transactions going through for the human accountability. We now have, or the applications that we're running for the humans, and now we have agent accountability through MCP. I call this the AI era. I'm not the only one calling it. So now the operations is saying, hey, we're rocking now. We're really moving. And the technology side is saying, we feel much better. We have a single control plane to operate this. We know what's happening with observability, and we can implement specific guardrails for specific roles and tasks and identities. And that changes that push and pull tension. And when that happens, then the business is happy. Thanks for listening.